Well, just as Zelensky was visiting Washington and negotiating his purchase, or I guess just acceptance, donation, whatever, of these new cluster missiles that have a 190-mile range that I discussed yesterday, we got evidence of new Ukrainian war crimes, courtesy of the intelligence assets at NAFO. Now, NAFO, for those of you who don't know, is it's like a hashtag, I guess, on Twitter, and they also have a Discord server. And they're a bunch of, I think, mostly American and British, but English-speaking Western people who support Ukraine, and they try and come up with pro-Ukraine memes, because they're very trendy, and so they're in touch with the kids. They even had a big convention in, I think it was Latvia this year. And anyway, these NAFO accounts are mostly just kind of annoying, but they are useful to follow because occasionally they will proudly tweet out Ukrainian war crimes and say, "Yeah, take that, Ruskies," watch it how this Ukrainian soldier just executed a prisoner. Wasn't that cool? And so we had a somewhat viral war crimes video that was tweeted out on Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday. Maybe it was Thursday. But just right as all this was going down. So if you have any doubt about whether or not the Zelensky is going to be a good boy and only use these new cluster missiles for totally legitimate and fair war-making purposes, I think that this video should clear up any doubts. And so I will be linking to it. I don't know if the video is going to stay up forever. It's been up for 2 days, so it doesn't seem that Twitter is taking it down, which is good. They should leave things like this up because we should see the truth. And what the video depicts is a Russian soldier, I guess, who was I can't really tell. I mean, it almost looks like they're dropping rifle grenades on him. I mean, that's what they look like. I don't know much about explosives, but they're dropping some kind of explosive thing down at him, and it blows up next to him, and he's like, and he's not dead, but he's clearly, like, his legs are blown up, and he's like, he's waving his hands, I surrender, and they just keep dropping these little grenades until he stops moving. So, for those of you who don't know, when someone surrenders in a war, you're not allowed to kill them. This is what we call a war crime. When the enemy gives up, you're supposed to take them prisoner and then, not torture them. You're supposed to kind of treat them as prisoners of war. And there are procedures on how you're supposed to treat prisoners of war. And it's really in everyone's best interest to obey things like the Geneva Conventions, because if you are totally unforgiving and cutthroat in the way in which you wage war, the enemy is going to become even more desperate. Because if Russians know that they don't have the option of surrendering to Ukraine, they're going to fight a lot harder, because they're going to fight to the death, because they know that surrendering will get them nothing. They will not be granted safety. They will not be able to withdraw from the war. In fact, is there even any incentive to defect? Maybe they would put you on video and, make you create some video denouncing Russia, and then they kill you. But if I were a Russian soldier, the last thing I would do is surrender to any Ukrainian soldier. And so if the Ukrainians have to kill literally every single Russian soldier, and they can't just tactically beat them and then get them to surrender to them, because that's what you really want in a war. It's not very efficient if you have to literally kill every single one of the enemy soldiers. What you want is you want to beat them on the battlefield. You want them to realize, oh, okay, we've been, checkmate. Okay, we're done. So it's time to surrender. That's what you want to have happen in a war. You want to outmaneuver your enemy. You want to cut them off. You want them to realize it's impossible for us to win, and so we're going to surrender. But if surrender is not an option, you take that option off the table. well then guess what? Even when Russian soldiers are facing impossible odds, they're going to have to keep fighting. Because, if you give up, then you're just dead immediately. Or they torture you. You'd rather die in combat than get tortured to death. And so even if the Ukrainians weren't hopelessly outmatched, this would be a problem for them. This would make it much harder for them to win their war if they had a chance of winning it. So anyway, what this video demonstrates, because it's a part of a pattern of behavior, because we've seen this with all sorts of videos throughout the war, this is just sort of the mentality within the Ukrainian armed forces. And when you pair that mentality with larger and larger weapons that do more and more damage, you're going to see a greater misuse of these weapons. Now, is that guaranteed? No. I mean, because you would hope that the more destructive weapons would be controlled by people at higher levels, not just some crazy soldier out in the field. But if you remember, under the Trump administration, he devolved authority on calling in airstrikes down to like the lowest, the lowest rank person possible. And so we don't know how these weapons are going to be used. We can only infer based on what else we've seen. And to me, when you see that it seems pretty common for them to just execute prisoners, people who are completely incapacitated, wounded soldiers, because that's what this guy was. He was wounded. He had no use of his legs because they were blown up. And then they decided to kill him anyway. And other videos we've seen in the past of POWs, hands tied behind their backs, blindfolded, and just, executed. I would not be at all surprised to see these new cluster missiles being deployed inside of Russia's borders. And when that does happen, that'll be a big problem politically. It'll just, like I said yesterday, bring us that much closer. And so I don't mean for what I'm saying today to be a retread of yesterday, but it's just, after seeing this video, it just sort of, it brought it to the forefront of my mind. And I don't want to have a screenshot from the video because I'm sure YouTube doesn't like war crimes being on YouTube, so I don't want this, even if it's a screenshot, to be taken down. So I'll probably just have up some image of like a NATO troll face, or NAFO troll face, same thing. And just since I haven't really talked about this topic a whole lot in the last few months, I guess I should reiterate my position on the war in general. In all of my slamming of Ukraine, I don't mean to try and imply that I think that the Ruskies are angels, and that Russia's cause is, is wonderful, and that necessarily that I'd love for them to win, even though I think that that's probably the better outcome of the two. I harp on Ukraine. See, I don't think I would have a strong opinion one way or the other about this war had my government not taken a side. And so because of that, I'm forced to look at the side that my government has taken and conclude we are backing bad guys. That does not mean that the other side are good guys. It just means that we are on the side of bad guys, which I don't think is a good thing. But overall, from what I've seen, the Ukrainians are much more brutal in their tactics, and you could say that perhaps comes down to desperation. Perhaps if the roles were reversed and it was Ukrainian soldiers fighting on Russian soil, that the Ruskies would be the ones who are more brutal, and that the Ukrainians would be more, let's say, optical about how they treat POWs. In general, from what I've seen, the Russians seem much more methodical and calculating in their actions, and Ukraine has been quite erratic, unpredictable, and reckless, which is not at all unexpected for a country that has been invaded and stands a great chance of frankly losing all of their territory. But these are all reasons not to support Ukraine. because it is very much a losing cause, and they don't make for great allies. Needless to say, there is nothing of interest to the average American in supporting Ukraine. We get nothing out of this. All we get are negatives. All we get are risks of being roped into a war with Russia. Ukraine has everything to lose, and America has nothing to gain. What Russia does, on the other hand, doesn't concern me. Doesn't concern this country. What Ukraine does very much concerns this country now that we're in bed with them. And so I will continue to be to scrutinize Ukraine's actions and their performance. And I think I will continue to show little interest in Russia. I mean, I took interest in what Russia was doing at first, at the start of the war, and then once things bogged down, there just wasn't much to say about what the Russians were doing. And, on the smaller scale stuff, I don't really care. If the battle lines aren't moving one way or the other, what the Ruskies are up to in the meantime doesn't affect me. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.